9 spine-chilling Walmart encounters, terrifying secrets exposed after dark that will haunt you. Alice felt the weight of exhaustion pressing down on her as she dragged herself down the fluorescent-lit aisles of Walmart, the clock ticking past midnight. The world outside was asleep, but here, hidden between the towering shelves of discount goods, unspeakable horrors lurked. Rumors whispered of shadows shifting just out of sight, of disappearing products, and night shift employees who vanished without a trace. It was the stuff of urban legends, yet every night, as she restocked shelves, those ghostly tales clawed at her mind. She forced herself to focus, to ignore the gnawing anxiety of making rent and keeping her teenage son, Tommy, safe. But the store had its secrets, and those secrets were hungry. One quiet evening, while restocking a dim corner of the store, Alice's fingers brushed against an unusual door, half hidden behind a stack of cardboard. It was an entrance to the basement, an ominous space rumored to be filled with nightmares. Something inside her whispered to turn back, but curiosity won. She hesitated for only a moment before descending into the dank darkness. The air thickened with the foul stench of neglect. Her heart raced, each beat echoing against damp walls, the creeping dread of being watched tightening its grip on her throat. As she stepped deeper into the tunnel, her cell phone light flickered against dirty surfaces, revealing forgotten relics, a rusted shopping cart, cracked bottles, and what looked like old clothes discarded in a hurry. Shadows flickered just beyond her peripherals, whispering tales of desperation and betrayal. Then Alice heard them, low, urgent whispers that twisted her stomach into knots. "We can't let them leave. They know too much." The words hung in the damp air with chilling finality. Panic spiked through her, and she turned to scramble back, only to find Tommy standing there, wide-eyed and horrified. "Mom. I followed you." He stammered, the concern etched on his young face morphing into terror as he caught sight of the creeping shadows behind her. Alice's heart plummeted. They were not alone. The dark figure of the store manager loomed just a few feet away, a smile that had always seemed warm now twisted into something sinister. He was as much a part of the town's folklore as the ghost stories Alice had used to soothe Tommy to sleep. The protector had become the predator. Every beat of Alice's heart pounded in her chest as they darted through the cluttered basement, adrenaline coloring her vision red. The walls felt tighter, narrowing their chance of escape. "We need to get out of here," she whispered to Tommy, who was shaking, his face pale as a ghost. The flickering fluorescent lights overhead suddenly sputtered, plunging them into darkness. "Mom!" he cried, fear lacing his voice. She grabbed his hand, terror coursing through her veins, knowing with each passing second that they were sliding deeper into a trap, a horrifying entanglement designed to snuff out their very lives. "Before we continue, I need to tell you something important that's happening. YouTube has been making changes to their system and many people are missing notifications from channels they follow. If you're enjoying the content, click the bell and select all notifications so you don't miss future videos. And if you can leave a like, it really helps me with reach. Seriously, it makes a difference. Oh, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I'm always curious to know who's on the other side of the screen. Now let's continue. They dashed for the spiral staircase, but the shadows were fast, relentless. Alice's breathing quickened, and every footfall echoed like thunder behind them. They reached the stairs, but just as they turned, the store manager appeared, a harbinger of horror with a glint of madness reflected in his eyes. "You two have been very curious," he hissed, stepping forward, closing in as Alice's blood chilled. The sudden realization hit her. Trust was the darkest game of all. Tommy gazed up at her, and in that single glance, they both understood, survival was now a fight against the familiar demons lurking in the guise of trusted faces. Just as the figure lunged towards them, Alice had one final glimpse of the eerie group gathered in the corner behind the manager, whispering in the shadows. The darkness was ready to swallow them whole. Would they emerge alive from this waking nightmare, or had they walked into a trap from which they could never escape? The darkness began to pulse around them like a living thing, and Alice felt a heavy dread suffocate her spirit. Alice's heart raced, a relentless drum echoing in the void of darkness. With a primal scream clawing at her throat, she yanked Tommy's hand and hurled herself down the staircase, her legs pumping beneath her as adrenaline took over. The air around them thickened with tension, and the whispers crescendoed into a deafening roar. Shadows danced in chaotic patterns, flickering closer, always just behind them. "Mom, where are we going?" Tommy gasped, his voice a fragile thread in the encroaching fear. "Just keep running," she shouted, the command tearing from her lips. The narrow passageways of the basement twisted in unfamiliar ways, and every turn felt like it was leading them deeper into an abyss. She couldn't remember which way was up anymore. The fluorescent lights of the store felt like a far-off dream, a glimmer of hope swallowed by despair. The store manager's laughter echoed in the distance, chilling Alice to the core. It was a sound she'd never heard before, menacing, alive with cruel delight. "You can't escape," he bellowed. "You belong here now, you all do." Fear surged through Alice, sharper than ever. She squeezed Tommy's hand tighter as they skidded around a corner. They reached a dead end. A cold metal door loomed in front of them, an imploring silence hissing in the darkness. Behind them, the footsteps of shadows closed in, echoing like thunder. "Oh no!" Alice whimpered, panic creeping in as she pounded her fist against the door. "Open, please." Tommy trembled beside her, whispering, "Mom, what if they catch us?" She spun around, losing precious seconds as she scanned for another escape. There was nowhere to run. The whispers circled around them, the shadows compressing until they felt suffocated. Her heartbeat roared in her ears, drowning out all reason. The door held promises of safety, but it stood stubbornly still, mocking her desperation. "You're not the first to be curious," a voice hissed from the encroaching darkness, serpentine and slow. Alice's stomach twisted at the sound. Was it a collective whisper? Shadows slithered closer, forming ghastly figures, and her eyes widened as grotesque faces emerged, people she recognized as former employees, eyes hollow and lifeless, forever trapped in the store's grasp. "No!" she gasped, her fingers finding the door handle. She gave it a twist, but it wouldn't budge. "Help!" She screamed in raw desperation. That a heavy silence fell, broken only by the sinister chuckling of the manager. "You'll join them soon enough," he taunted, an unsettling familiarity settling in the pit of her stomach. "You're already part of the collection." The door resisted, the manager's laughter echoing in her mind, the horrific truth washing over her like a freezing wave. Would they live to tell this tale, or was she slowly becoming part of the store's dark legacy? At that moment, a desperate idea bloomed in her mind. "Tommy! The vent!" she shouted, suddenly remembering a maintenance duct she passed earlier while restocking. "We can squeeze through, I know we can." "Are you sure, Mom?" he pleaded, glancing over his shoulder at the encroaching shadows. "There's no time," she urged, pushing him towards the other end of the narrow hallway. Every fiber of her being screamed for them to act fast. She led him to the end of the corridor, adrenaline coursing through her like fire as she hurled a shelf of supplies against the wall. "Squeeze in!" she cried, forcing herself into the tight space first. She felt his hand brush past her back, clutching the duct to pull himself into the darkness. As they settled into the constricted space, Alice felt a strange sense of urgency. The shadows danced just outside, and she could feel their cold breath on her exposed skin. But they were not alone. As her eyes adjusted, Alice glimpsed faint glimmers of light ahead. Was it freedom or another trap waiting to ensnare them? She held her breath, the tightness of the duct wrapping around her like chains, as she and Tommy crawled deeper into the unknown. Moments later, a chilling sound echoed from the exit, a familiar laughter mixing with the whispers. They weren't free yet, and then she realized, the darkness had more plans for them. The metal vent squeaked under their weight as Alice and Tommy crawled deeper into the labyrinth of ducts. Each twist and turn felt like a gamble, each pause a risk. The cold chill of dread settled in her bones, as if the shadows were reaching, trying to grab hold. Above her, the laughter taunted, a reminder that they were not alone. "Mom, I can hear them." Tommy whimpered, his small voice strained and quivering as he struggled to keep pace. "I know," she gasped, forcing her body to move, her heart racing, "but we have to keep going." The glow ahead flickered and dimmed, like the last breaths of a candle. Alice could feel the air getting heavier. It pressed down on her, each breath harder to take. What awaited them beyond the duct's safety or doom? Uncertainty gnawed at her mind. Suddenly, the light blinked out completely. The pitch-black darkness engulfed them, swallowing the gleam whole. Alice's pulse quickened, the realization that they may not be on the verge of escape sent a wave of panic surging through her. With trembling hands, she reached back, feeling for Tommy. "Stay close," she whispered, but panic threatened to drown her voice. The sound of their breathing became amplified, deafening in the surrounding silence. "Mom, I'm scared." Tommy's voice was barely above a whisper, vulnerable and fragile. She wanted to reassure him, tell him everything would be okay, but deep down, a hollow dread echoed in her chest. "Me too, honey," she said, her own voice quivering. "But we'll find a way out together." Crawling again, she felt the edges of fear sharpen as they drew closer to whatever lay ahead. A soft hiss broke the silence. Was it the air escaping around them or something else? The gloom thickened, and the foul, rotten smell hinted that they might not be alone. "They're coming," Tommy squeaked, a quiver breaking through his words as he pressed even closer. Alice's breath hitched at the echoing shadows, their anxious whispers now louder and clearer. Faint shapes swirled behind the grate, fragments of something that resembled human faces distorted, hollow, crying out for release. Ghosts trapped between worlds, their eyes fixated on Alice and Tommy, mirroring their terror. Desperation built up inside her, mingled with dread. Alice felt trapped, watching the distorted figures shift, their mouths moving in silent screams, understandable only in her nightmares. She squeezed Tommy's hand, the warmth of his small fingers grounding her. "Mom, please," he cried, his voice cracking. "What do we do?" "Keep crawling. We'll reach." But before she could finish, the evening shattered with an unholy screech that pierced through the darkness, metal scraping against metal, and the cold hiss intensified. Something was forcing its way into the duct, a pressing weight that sent her heart into a full-blown sprint. "Go! Go!" Alice shouted, adrenaline coursing through her, pushing them faster. The exit loomed ahead, a warm glow that felt teasingly out of reach. She didn't know what was chasing them but felt it breathing down her back, a shadow seeking to devour them whole. With one last surge of frantic energy, they thrust themselves out of the duct and landed in a dimly lit storage area. The familiar scent of the store surrounded them, but it felt tainted now. A long row of empty shelves stood before them like silent sentinels. They could hear whispers again, shifting and swirling around the room, ominous and alive. "Mom, we can't hide here." Tommy pulled at her arm urgently. "No, I know. There has to be a way out," she replied, heart pounding painfully in her chest. But as they looked around, Alice felt the air change, thickening and twisting until it seemed to pulse with life. A figure appeared in the corner of her eye, just a silhouette at first. She turned, her heart freezing when she recognized the store manager standing amidst the aisles, his smile wide and unnaturally sinister. "Welcome back, Alice. I've been waiting for you." Alice's heart dropped. This was no escape, this was the beginning of something far worse, and the shadows that lurked had plans for them. Both. Would they fight or become part of his collection? In that fragile moment, she realized, this nightmare was far from over. Alice barely had time to register the manager's grotesque grin before panic set in, tightening around her throat like a noose. "Tommy, run!" she yelled, willing her legs to move, but they felt glued to the ground, frozen in place by the man's stare. The store manager advanced slowly, his footsteps echoing like thunder through the silent aisles. Each step resonated with a chilling certainty. Shadows stretched and twisted around him, contorting into shapes that flickered and danced, whispering secrets of dread and despair. "You can't leave so soon," he said, voice smooth but dripping with malice. "The fun is just beginning." Mom! Tommy shrieked, tugging at her arm with desperate urgency. We have to go. Now. Alice blinked, snapping back into reality. She pulled Tommy close, her mind racing. They didn't have time for questions. The manager's voice faded into the background as fear clawed at her insides, urging her muscles to obey. This way. She planted her feet and guided Tommy toward an opening between the shelves, praying for escape. Behind them, the manager's laughter echoed, a twisted sound that unnerved her to the core. You can't escape love. You belong here. Shadows slithered, glowing faintly as grotesque forms twisted into view, figures tied to memories, unwelcome reminders of all they needed to escape. The store transformed into a maze of horrors, and they were the trapped mice. They dashed toward the back of the storage room, where the emergency exit loomed in the dim light. Alice could barely see, only the flicker of a bulb stubbornly holding onto its last flickers of light above them. As they approached the door, an oppressive presence fell upon them, a weight that promised to pull them back. Don't look back. She shouted, her heart racing loud enough to drown out the ominous whispers now rising like a crescendo behind them. They were almost there, but the urgent whispers began forming words, clawing through her mind. Betrayal, surrender, acceptance. Tommy stumbled, a chill gripping his small body. I can't breathe. Just a little more. Alice shouted, turning her head only slightly, catching sight of the manager. He stood still, watching, an eager predator waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Shadows warped at his feet, clinging, beckoning like arms made of smoke. Fear wrapped tightly around her throat, but she forced herself to move. They reached the emergency door, and with trembling hands, Alice fumbled to push it open. It protested, stiff and unyielding. No. No. She screamed, pushing harder, desperation pouring through her veins. With a final thrust, the door creaked open, jarring against the silence. Alice flung herself and Tommy through the threshold and into the freezing night air. The night sky loomed above, a canopy of indifferent stars. But the safety they sought felt like a mirage, the ground beneath them unsteady as a sense of impending doom gnawed at the edges of their relief. Where do we go? Tommy gasped, looking around as if the shadows from inside had followed them. Alice turned, but before she could answer, a figure stepped into view. It was her, a ghostly replica of herself, trapped in a state of hollow resignation. Eyes wide, filled with unspeakable sorrow. You won't escape, it whispered, the words curling in the air like smoke. Alice felt her pulse quicken again. The spectre raised a hand, pointing toward the far end of the lot, where the old delivery entrance lay cloaked in darkness. It was an invitation, or perhaps a warning. Follow it, the phantom urged, voice a soft echo. Before he comes back. Tommy looked at her, confusion swirling in his young eyes. Mom, what do we do? She swallowed hard. No more waiting. No more uncertainty. We'll go. We have to. We can't stay here. They sprinted toward the darkness again, but Alice couldn't shake the feeling that no matter where they ran, the manager's gaze was still upon them, watching, waiting. As they fled, the echoes of laughter blended with the whispers of shadows, murky promises of what awaited them. What had they unleashed? The spectre of her past loomed larger with each passing second, and with it, the unsettling truth. This was not merely a chase, it was a game, and the rules were still being written. Still, as they neared the delivery entrance, Alice couldn't help but wonder, would they be the ones playing, or the ones sacrificed? What lay waiting behind that door? The darkness around the old delivery entrance festered with an uneasy silence, as if the night itself was holding its breath. Alice's heart thudded in her chest, each pulse a frantic drumbeat urging her to flee, but the shadows felt thicker here, more alive. She reached for Tommy's hand, squeezing tightly, seeking comfort in connection when everything else felt terrifyingly uncertain. What if it's a trap? He muttered, glancing back as if expecting the manager to materialize from the dense fog that had settled over the lot. We won't know unless we try, Alice replied, her voice a tremor against the stillness. She could feel the pull of the sinister specter behind them, as if it were still clawing at the corners of their minds, whispering dark secrets and long-buried fears. Pushing open the heavy door, Alice braced herself, a shiver coursing through her as the chill air rushed in. Inside, the delivery dock was a labyrinth of abandoned crates and rusting equipment, remnants of commerce long gone stale. The weary shadows danced in the flickering light from a single bulb swinging overhead like a pendulum of doom. As they stepped inside, the door creaked loudly behind them, the sound echoing like a bell tolling. "We shouldn't have come here," Tommy said, his voice barely a whisper as he peered into the darkness, eyes wide with fright. "Keep close to me," Alice said, forcing herself to stay calm. Every instinct screamed to turn back, yet there was something about the place that drew her deeper in. The air was thick with tension, suffocating and heavy. Flickers of movement brushed at the edges of her vision, causing her to spin around, but nothing remained. Just shadows that flickered with malicious glee. "Stay together," she urged, leading Tommy further into the maze, her own breathing shallow and frantic. A muffled sound echoed, not far from where they were standing. A low humming, drenched in melancholy, beckoned her forward. "Mom, please." Tommy clutched her tighter, fear palpable in his small frame. "Just a little more," she whispered back, her voice trembling but steady. They moved cautiously toward the source, each step cracking against the debris-strewn floor. As they rounded a corner, the humming stopped abruptly, replaced by something far worse, silence, so profound that it stung. Then came the unmistakable sound of shuffling footsteps. Alice froze, her heart racing again. She glanced down at Tommy, whose face was pale, eyes wide. "Someone's there," he whispered, shaking slightly. Without thinking, Alice ducked behind a stack of crates, pulling Tommy down with her. She held her breath, straining to hear through the cloak of silence that descended like a predator stalking its prey. The footsteps shuffled closer, then halted just outside their fragile hiding spot. A voice crackled in the dark, low and haunting, a familiar tune twisted into something grotesque. "Welcome back, you two are just in time for the show," the voice sang, an echo of the manager's sickening cadence wrapped in fog and menace. Her blood ran cold. She peered through a gap between the crates, and there he stood, the manager's silhouette stretching under the dim light, grinning widely. It wasn't just the smile that sent terror coursing through her. His shadow danced with an odd rhythm, swirling around in a perverse ballet. "We're not here for your games," she shouted, her voice cutting through the air like a blade. "Ah, but the games are just beginning," he replied, stepping closer, casting long shadows that melted into the ground like liquid darkness. Alice's mind raced. There had to be a way out. But even as her instincts tightened like a vice, she could feel it, the inescapable truth binding them there, the weight of becoming just another piece in his twisted game. "Mom, we have to run," Tommy cried, panic bubbling over. "On the count of 3, we bolt for the back," she breathed, determination igniting within her. But deep inside, she knew something was off. 1, 2 before she could say 3, the shadows lunged, stretching out like claws reaching for them, pulling her back into the darkness. "Too late," the manager's voice sang, taunting her as limpid darkness closed in around them. Time slowed as Alice tried to pull Tommy closer, ready to fight for their lives. They had escaped from one trap, but what lay ahead turned out to be an even more twisted nightmare. Would they ever truly find freedom, or was this just the beginning of something far worse? Caught between shadow and light, Alice clenched her fists and steeled herself. Outside, the world seemed so far away. What awaited them on the other side of the next door? Would they dare to discover the truth, or would they vanish forever into the abyss? The shadows enveloped them, an inky blanket suffocating their desperate breaths. Alice felt the chill crawl up her spine, but her instincts blazed with an urgency to move. Bolting, she yanked Tommy's hand, and they lurched forward, darting through the alley of crates just as the shadowy tendrils brushed past their ankles. "Run!" she hissed, her voice cracking as fear surged. The darkness seemed alive, feeding off their panic as it swirled around them, whispering taunts they could barely understand. Every step felt like pushing through molasses, but they propelled themselves forward, teeth gritted against the unwanted weight of despair pressing down. Suddenly, a wall loomed large in front of them. An abrupt stop forced them to huddle close. Alice's eyes darted side to side, searching for a sliver of light, a promise of escape. "Where do we go?" Tommy whimpered, his small frame shaking against her. "Over there." She pointed toward a narrow gap between two towering stacks, debris piled high like a fortress. With no time to waste, she tightened her grip and propelled them both, squeezing through the cramped space. The jagged edges scraped her shoulders, but she pressed on, dragging Tommy along. On the other side, they collapsed onto the cold concrete, panting hard. Their eyes adjusted to the dim light filtering through shattered windows. Dust motes danced, floating eerily in the stale air. They were in a different section of the dock, lined with remnants of lost deliveries. The walls whispered secrets she dared not listen to. "We need to keep moving," Alice urged, instinctively aware of the danger lurking behind them. But before she could take a step, a loud crash echoed from behind. The sound of crates falling echoed like thunder. "Get down!" she shouted, shoving Tommy behind a rusted trash bin, her heart hammering as the darkness shifted ominously. The manager's voice cut through the stillness, now closer, dripping with sadistic glee. "You really think you can hide from me?" He clapped slowly, and the sound echoed, mocking them. "The show is far from over." Alice felt ice in her veins, clutching Tommy tighter as he stared wide-eyed, frozen in fear. "Mom," he whispered, the tremor in his voice unraveling her. "Look at me, Tommy. Focus on me," she managed to say, struggling to keep her own terror at bay. "We're going to get out of here." Just as she said it, a sliver of light broke through the gloom and exit. It beckoned like a beacon, promising safety. But the manager's booming laugh rattled the air. "Oh, but sweet Alice, you missed the best part." He lunged into view, and Alice felt her stomach drop. A glint of something sharp glimmered in his hand, a knife reflecting the last remnants of light in this no-man's land. He approached with deliberate slowness, each step echoing like a countdown to their doom. "You have such spirit, but it's all for nothing. Run, Tommy!" She screamed, adrenaline igniting her limbs as she shoved him toward the light. But just before they could reach it, a blinding darkness erupted. Tommy stumbled, and Alice spun to grab him, her heart tearing at the threat of losing him. "No!" she shouted, panic clawing at her throat. In that moment, the world spun, a whirlwind of shadows seizing her. "Don't you dare leave!" The manager snarled, his voice wrapping around her like chains as she felt the tendrils coil about her wrist, yanking her back. They were trapped, and she could sense it. The shadows whispered, the weight of 1,000 eyes boring into her. Her mind raced for a plan as Tommy cried out, the echoes bouncing cruelly against the steel walls. Would they live to escape the maze of horrors before them? Could they outsmart the man who seemed to embody the very darkness they feared? With one final surge of strength, she locked eyes with Tommy. "Together, we fight." And with that, she surged forward again, battling not only for their escape but for the hope that flickered in her heart. What loomed around the corner? What trap awaited them next, and could the light still shine through the overwhelming dark? As the shadows thickened, a sense of dread filled the air, solidifying around them like a vice. They were not alone. Something else lingered just out of sight, craving their fear. What horror lurked in the dark? Would they find salvation, or were they destined to vanish into the ever-encroaching abyss? Alice tightened her grip on Tommy's hand, her breath hitching as the darkness rippled like a living entity, clawing at her senses. She felt the heat of his small palm against her own, and it steadied her just enough to take a tentative step forward. Somewhere nearby, the manager's chilling laugh echoed, a grim reminder of the danger trailing them. "Stay close," she urged, her voice barely a whisper, trembling as she scanned their surroundings. Dim shapes loomed in the corners, stacked crates looming like twisted sentinels, casting long shadows that seemed to stretch further with each passing second. Every echo felt like a reminder that they weren't alone, that the shadows held more than just fear. They stumbled deeper into the warehouse. The ground beneath them crunched with each hurried step, a haunting symphony contributing to their dread. Alice's heart raced as she forced her mind to think. There must be another way out, she muttered under her breath, searching for any glint of hope amidst the suffocating shroud of despair. Suddenly, a gust of wind whipped through the space, chilling her to the bone. The breeze brought with it the unforgiving scent of decay, and she quickly pulled Tommy closer. His wide eyes stared up at her, reflecting her own fear. "You're okay, Tommy," she said, wrapping her arm around him protectively. She struggled to sound brave, knowing her assurance was as fragile as the darkness surrounding them, but then, a whisper slithered through the air, cold and malevolent. "You cannot hide, I will always find you." It slithered through the stale atmosphere, wrapping around Alice's mind like a noose. The words dripped from the shadows, almost playful, taunting her as they slithered behind her. "Keep moving," she urged, and they stumbled toward a faint glimmer of light peeking through a doorway, a promise of escape. But just as they neared it, she heard another crash. Tremors shook the ground as another stack of crates collapsed somewhere nearby. The thud felt physical, as heavy as her heart. Among the dust and debris, the manager appeared, emerging like a specter from the gloom. "Did you really think you could escape?" His voice was a low drawl, as he stepped into the light, exaggerated shadows dancing across his angular face. Alice felt her stomach drop. The knife glinted, sinister in his grip, reflecting the fading light. His eyes were wild, glimmering with the thrill of the hunt. The corridor behind them was darker now, as if the shadows were closing in, eager to swallow her whole. "Run!" she shouted as she pushed Tommy toward the light. "Get out!" But the moment Tommy moved ahead, the ground beneath them trembled again. A section of the warehouse floor cracked open, revealing a gaping maw of darkness. Tommy faltered. "Alice!" "No, no, no!" Fear shot through her veins like ice. Without thinking, she lunged forward, grabbing Tommy just as he hovered at the edge. She felt the darkness pulling at them, hungry and relentless, as if seeking to drag them down into its fathomless depths. "Hold on to me!" she shouted, gripping him tighter. She could feel her heart thundering in her chest, a frantic drum beat against the encroaching fear. Suddenly, the manager laughed, a wicked sound echoing off the steel walls. "It's too late. The darkness always finds a way." His cruelty made her blood run cold, and for a fleeting instant, despair clawed at her resolve. But deep down, a spark ignited. She wasn't just fighting for herself anymore, but for Tommy too. With one massive effort, she tugged him away from the edge, retreating toward the light. The fabric of safety was just a few steps ahead, but darkness stirred, a storm ready to engulf them anew. What new terrors awaited them in that fleeting light? Would they escape, or was this just the beginning of their nightmare? The ground beneath them groaned again, shadows flickering like hungry beasts poised to strike. As they raced forward, they felt the air shift. Something was coming. Was it salvation? Or was it a trap set to claim them for good? Alice's breath caught as she and Tommy lurched toward the light, the faint glimmer ahead like a distant star in a night devoid of hope. The manager's laughter faded into the chaos behind them, but the echoes in her mind swirled like a maelstrom. She forced herself to move, each step heavier than the last, driven by sheer panic. "Faster!" she hissed, the urgency in her voice laced with dread. Her mind raced with thoughts of escape but twisted visions of the shadows clawing back at her heart. The light grew, shimmering like a mirage. But it was a cruel deception. As they neared, Alice realized the door frame was warped, twisting and bending at unnatural angles. "What's wrong?" Tommy's voice was small, tinged with confusion. "I don't know, just keep moving," she insisted, her heart pounding against her ribs like a trapped animal. The air thickened, wrapping around them, almost alive, suffocating. Beyond the doorway, the light flickered violently. Shapes danced in its glow, writhing and contorting, almost as if the light itself was instinctively recoiling from something about to emerge. The thought made Alice's stomach churn. A splintering sound filled the air, heavy and resonant. She turned just in time to see the manager, now looming, eyes ablaze with a predatory thrill. "You think you can just stroll out? This is my domain." His voice dripped with malice, each syllable slicing through the tension. "Move!" She screamed, her grip on Tommy tightening as she darted toward the light. Panic surged through her. They couldn't let him intercept them. Desperate energy coursed through her limbs, pushing her towards what appeared to be safety. But then another tremor rocked the floor. The shadowed maw that had cracked open now pulsated, as if breathing, drawing in its surroundings. Its edges quivered, dark and seductive, beckoning them to step closer, to fall in. "Tommy!" she cried, eyes wide with horror as she yanked him back. Their feet stumbled on the uneven ground, teetering on the brink as the darkness surged. "They'll drown you," the manager taunted, his voice like ice. "You're already trapped in the void, don't you see?" "No!" Alice shouted, trying to drown out his words. Desperation turned to fury. They had to break free. She pushed Tommy ahead of her, forcing his small legs to sprint toward the light, but as they drew close, the air crackled and thickened, the glowing doorway warping further into a sinister rectangle. It felt like a phantom bridge, teetering between possibility and despair. The shadows behind them surged, a slick tide ready to roll over and consume them. Just inches from safety, Tommy stumbled, catching himself on the frame as the light dimmed. "Alice!" he cried out, his voice quavering. "Hold on!" she yelled, her heart breaking at the panic in his tone. Determined, she lunged forward, throwing herself at the door, grabbing him just in time. But the moment she did, the shadows lunged too, rushing forward like a wildfire. It grabbed at them, pulling at their clothes and skin, clinging with a malevolent energy as if reaching into their very souls. "Let go!" she screamed. The sudden surge of darkness threw them backward, flinging them away from the entrance. The light flickered violently and then vanished, swallowed whole by the shadows. They were plunged into darkness again, the temperature dropping sharply. The only sound was their heavy breathing, laced with fear. The manager's laughter echoed around them, a twisted taunt enveloping them. "Now, where will you run?" he whispered, his voice slithering like a snake behind them, shadows pulsing like living entities. Alice's mind raced what was happening. Panic surged anew. "We'll find another exit," but in the suffocating ink of despair, the words felt hollow. Tommy's hand squeezed hers tighter, the only light remaining in this pit of shadows. She turned, knowing dread would cloak her next move. What would they face now, deep within this abyss? Would they fight against the encroaching darkness or become its unwilling prey? As the air grew colder and the terrifying laughter echoed hauntingly around them, their next step lingered precariously in the shadows. The darkness pressed in around them, thick and suffocating. Alice's heart raced like a drum in a death march. She could hardly hear herself think, each frantic breath caught in the coil of her panic. The laughter echoed in her ears, a relentless taunt spiraling into madness. "Tommy," she whispered, squeezing his hand tighter. "We have to keep moving." But where? The vast expanse of black seemed to swallow all paths. She took a step forward, but the ground felt unstable, as if the very floor they stood on was shifting beneath them, like quicksand drawing them into despair. "Take a deep breath," she instructed, her voice barely above a whisper. She could feel his small body tremble beside her. Tommy's innocence weighed heavily on her conscience. "We'll find a way out." But as they crept deeper into the void, the oppressive air felt like a shroud. Shadows flickered at the corners of her vision, darting away when she turned to look. She fought hard not to succumb to the terror. A memory bubbled within her, the stories of lost children told as cautionary tales, the faint glimmer of progress against a backdrop of despair. "Tommy," she said, her voice shaking with fear but firm in its resolve. "We can't lose hope. We have to trust each other." "Okay," he replied, though his voice trembled. Suddenly, the manager's voice emerged from the shadows, piercing the oppressive silence. Trust? What a foolish notion. Hope. It's a fragile power, child. It shatters easily. Alice felt cold dread lace through her gut. We're not afraid of you, she shouted, summoning defiance. You can't take us. The laughter swelled, mocking and indecipherable. But I already have you long past the point of no return. This is where nightmares are born. A shiver ran down her spine as a guttural sound emerged from the shadows, raw and unsettling. It was a horde of whispers rising up to assault her senses, each hushed voice echoing her worst fears. The things lurking in the dark were hungry. Run! Alice shouted, yanking Tommy forward just as a rush of air pulled violently at their clothes. The shadows seemed to swirl around them, spiraling like a cyclone, and she stumbled, trying to maintain her footing. Tommy fell, and desperation clawed at Alice's throat. No! Tommy! She reached down, pulling him back to her, her heart racing with a mix of terror and overwhelming protectiveness. They staggered forward in the crushing dark until a sudden flash illuminated their surroundings. It was brief but blinding enough to reveal grotesque forms writhing in the darkness, faces twisted with pain and mouths wide in silent screams. They were not alone in this hell. What are they? Tommy whispered, the tremor in his voice echoing Alice's own fear. Just keep moving, she urged. But the flicker of light had already vanished, plunging them back into the suffocating blackness. The laughter returned, more sinister than before. Do you really think you can escape? The manager taunted, gradually fading into a low, mocking tone. Alice's pulse raced as she pushed forward, feeling invisible eyes bore into her from every angle. Her instinct told her to fight, to claw her way through this impenetrable nightmare. But as they stumbled blindly, the very air stirred with an unseen energy, wrapping around them like a noose. The walls are closing in, she hissed, dread flooding her veins anew. I can feel it. We have to find a way out before it's too late. Could they outrun the inevitable? The shadows whispered truths she didn't want to hear, curling deeper into her psyche. Nothing felt real anymore. Let us go. Tommy's voice sliced through her thoughts, filled with childlike determination. With a burst of strength, they pushed against the tide of despair, heart pounding as they raced into the unknown. But as Alice took every step, dread coiled ever tighter around her. What if they were running toward a fate far worse than they could imagine? The questions loomed like the shadows creeping closer around them. What awaited them in this dreadful abyss? What trap had they now wandered into? Alice's heart thundered as she pulled Tommy through the crushing darkness. Each chill gust felt like fingertips brushing against her skin, urging them deeper into the abyss. Whispered taunts echoed, and dread clawed at her chest. She could almost hear the shadows laughing as they stirred and twisted around them. Mom, we need to stop. Tommy's voice broke through the dread, trembling and weak. I can't take it anymore. Forcing a breath, she knelt beside him, clutching his trembling shoulders. Listen, Tommy. We are stronger than this dark place. We can't give up. But even as she spoke, uncertainty gnawed at her. Every ounce of courage began to feel fragile, crumbling like old dust. The shadows threatened to swallow them both whole. We have to find a way out before it does, she urged, glancing around for any sign of hope. Remember the plan we made earlier? Yes, he nodded, wiping tears from his small cheeks. Alice squared her shoulders, determined. Then let us find that light. Together. They crawled ahead, inching closer to where the bitter air shifted, and there it was a hint of a glow pushing back the dark. But the manager's voice cut through the air, thick and taunting. Did you really think you could escape? The fun has just begun. The shadows rippled, closing in dangerously. Each step felt like a fight against the very ground beneath them. Don't look back. Alice whispered fiercely as she tugged Tommy forward. They pressed on toward the faint light, but the darkness surged, clawing at their heels, sinister whispers rising in a deafening crescendo. Suddenly, a piercing scream shattered the gloom. The hallowed, pained wails echoed in unnerving harmony, and Alice's heart dropped. "Go, Tommy. Now." She squeezed his hand tighter, desperately pushing him toward the glow. They could feel the warmth of the light enveloping them, beckoning them closer. Just as they neared, a heavy figure loomed from the shadows, blocking their path. The manager stood grinning, knife raised and glinting maliciously in the dim light. "You thought the end would be so easy?" he hissed, venom lacing every word. He stepped closer, shadows swirling violently around him. Alice felt terror rise to her throat as she pushed Tommy behind her. "No!" she screamed, grounding her voice in defiance. "You lost the moment we decided to fight back." With a surge of courage, she lunged toward him, catching him off guard. The knife missed her by inches as she rolled out to the side, adrenaline surging in her veins. "Run, Tommy, run!" she shouted, charging towards the door. "Mom!" Tommy cried, but she wouldn't turn back. Suddenly, the shadows wrapped around the manager, suppressing his movements with spectral chains. The trapped souls he had enslaved lashed back in rage, a misbegotten army rising around him. Their hollow eyes fixed on Alice and Tommy, urging them toward the light. "Now's our chance!" she shouted. They darted past the struggling figure, the dim light growing brighter with every frantic step. The warmth washed over them like a burst of freedom. Then came the laughter, haunting and echoing as the darkness writhed behind them, desperate to cling on to what it had lost. "You can't run forever," the manager screeched, voice fading with the retreating shadows, but Alice didn't look back. They burst through the door, the world outside breaking forth in a kaleidoscope of color under the stars. The night air felt fresh and intoxicating. They sprinted toward the far end of the parking lot, gasping and laughing, the terror of the dark slowly fading behind them. As they reached the safety of their car, Alice felt Tommy's small arms wrap around her. She embraced him tightly, the weight of fear lifting like a thick fog. "We did it. We really did it." Tommy stared up at her, the fear in his eyes replaced by the courage that glimmered through his tears. "We're free now, right?" Alice nodded, a swell of pride filling her heart. "Yes, we are. Together, we're free." They climbed into the car, Alice glancing back one last time at the dark store trailing behind. The whispers faded into the night, and with every mile ticking away from the horrors of the past, Alice felt a delicate hope bloom within her. They weren't just survivors, they had fought, and that was worth everything. As they drove away, the shadows fell silent, recalling their secrets back into the dark. What lay ahead would always remain unknown, but Alice knew one thing for sure, she would protect Tommy through whatever came next. Alice squeezed the steering wheel tighter, determination lighting a fire in her chest. They would face the uncertainty together. No darkness could hold them captive again, and in this new dawn, they would always strive toward the light, and there was hope. If you're still with us after this heart-stopping conclusion, you need to subscribe now. Don't wait even one more second to show your support for the channel. You won't want to miss out on the next thrilling story. Smash that like button now to feed the algorithm so we can keep delivering amazing content. And flood the comments section with all your reactions and theories about this ending. I can't wait to hear what you think. Also, instantly share this video with at least 5 friends who need to experience this conclusion. Only true fans understand the importance of supporting the channel through these actions. Let's keep this community strong and engaged.